Where do you get your inspiration? That's a question I'm often asked by interviewers and by other writers. Sometimes the question takes a different form. Are your stories based on events and experiences from your own life? Regardless of which question I'm asked, it all comes down to the same desire to understand how I can come up with so many different plots, characters, and scenarios for my short stories and novels. And when the question comes from writers, it might be because they're struggling to tap into their own creativity and imagination, but are having difficulty doing so. I wish I had a good answer, but I don't. And to make it even more complicated, my short stories come from one place in my writer's mind, and my novels from another. Let me explain. My midlife Moxie novels feature women 50 and older who are navigating the challenges that come with this stage of life. So that already gives me something to work with, although each novel has its own set of characters and plot lines because they are standalones. And to make sure I don't repeat plots or run out of ideas before I run out of time, I keep a running list of story possibilities, as well as a short description of each completed novel. For instance, Reinventing Rita is about a 50-year-old woman experiencing empty nest syndrome since her son, her only child, won't be coming back home to live after college. So she needs to find out who she can be and will be in the future since her role as a full-time mother is over. On the other hand, in Transforming Tessa, which comes out in 2026, the main character is 65 and recently widowed, grieving for her beloved husband and afraid that she can't make it through life without him. She has to build her confidence in herself, which will also allow her to help support others in her life. So I'm working within a defined structure and theme, and all I need to do is draw on all the stories that women have told me many times at my book signings to develop the novels. It's like being an architect who has to design a building. He already knows what the structure will be, residential, commercial, or industrial, and what the budget is set at. The rest is up to him. Using that analogy, the structure of my novels is women's contemporary fiction, and the budget is the word count, somewhere around 85,000 plus words. Are my novels based on events and experiences from my own life? Well, yes and no. I've never lost a spouse, but I have lost people who are dear to me. I have experienced my own empty nest feeling, which is really a loss of identity. However, it wasn't when my last child left home, but when my father, who lived with me the last few years of his life, died. Since my mother had died in 2005, 10 years earlier, I was now no longer someone's daughter. So rather being based on my own history, my novels are based on emotional reactions I may have had to certain life events that in some way correlate to what my characters are going through. But writing short stories is entirely different. I never know what the stories are about, who the characters are, what conflicts they have to deal with, or even the tone, happy, sad, downright weird, the stories will have. No preconceptions, no notes, and no ideas. No nothing. So where does it come from? How do I create a short story out of nothing? Well, I hear a line of dialogue. Someone, somewhere, I don't know who, man, woman, child, says something. Says it to his or herself or to another person. And once I hear the line, I start writing and see where it takes me. And no one is more surprised than I am to find out where I end up. Same question again. Are my short stories based on events and experiences from my own life? Generally speaking, no. And in many cases, after the story is written, I realize that it was, in a sense, a way of preparing for a life experience that I have yet to have and maybe dreading. For example, in Misconnections, a story in Traveling Left of Center and Other Stories, there's a scene where the woman awakes from a dream about her parents dying. When I first wrote that story in 1998, my parents were alive and well, but the fear I had about losing them, the anguish I knew I would feel, were never far from my mind. So I was writing, not about something I had already experienced, but about something yet to come. That fear was something my character had to deal with, and I was watching and learning and experiencing right along with that character. Another example, this one from Peripheral Visions and Other Stories. The title story was originally drafted in 1994, long before either of my parents developed cancer. I have no clue where the idea came from. A 72-year-old woman making her first road trip all alone, a trip that would take her from Northeast Ohio to St. Augustine, Florida. I drafted it, but then left it in my files because it needed specific details that I couldn't add until I did my own research. And in 2016, a few months after my father died, I made that trip, ostensibly to complete the story, but really to process that overwhelming loss. Lena, the main character in that story, was my traveling companion, and a story that I had started more than 2 decades earlier was my source of comfort and support. How did I know in 1994 that sometime in the future I would need that story? I didn't, and yet there it was. Granted, not all my stories serve an emotional or psychological purpose. Some of them, like Aunt Aggie and the Makeup Lady, also from Peripheral Visions, are pure enjoyment, escapist entertainment. They bring me happiness when I'm writing them and later when I read them over. But more often than not, what my characters go through are events that I have yet to experience, occurrences that I might be afraid of or long for. They are my advance guard, undertaking the preparations to allow me to keep going if and when the battle commences. So, in answer to the questions I started this piece with, the source and inspiration from my work depends on what I am writing and how much control I have. The novels, a fair amount. The short stories, none at all. But that's the way it is. Writing is a creative process. Sometimes we have control and lead the characters. Other times, we follow behind. But as long as we keep writing, it's all good.